It's week 13 crossover, and we're going to find out who's real, the Chargers defense or the Falcons offense.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to a crossover Thursday here on Locked On Falcons and Locked On Chargers. And crossover Thursday is, of course, presented by our friends Prize Picks. Download the app and use the code Locked On NFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So if you don't know me, I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, joined by Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers. We get the privilege of getting Daniel Wade on his first crossover Thursday of the 2024 season. He just came out of the woodwork because he knows this is such a crucial matchup in this week 13 battle between the Atlanta Falcons and LA Chargers. And we, of course, appreciate each and every one of you that is everydayers of both of our podcasts. And if you want to become an everydayer and make either Locked On Falcons or Locked On Chargers your first listen each and every day, all you have to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So we're going to be breaking down the big stories for each and one of these teams, maybe talk some key matchups, sort of how do the Chargers bounce back after a tough loss to the Baltimore Ravens? Do the Falcons, coming off of their Week 12 bye, come out and play better football than they've played in recent weeks? And we'll get into keys to victory as well later in the show. But Daniel, let's talk about the Chargers first, right? We most recently saw them on Monday night have a disheartening loss against the Baltimore Ravens. And as you and David discussed on Locked On Chargers the other day, this was sort of their opportunity to sort of show that they're for real. They're a real contender in that AFC, beating one of the better teams in that AFC, and unfortunately coming up a little bit short. But as they sort of pivot off of that loss, what is sort of the big stories for this Chargers team heading into Week 13, traveling to Atlanta?
Yeah, Aaron, I think you're making great points about just that loss and what it kind of signified for the Chargers and kind of just where they're at, right, in the first year under Jim Harbaugh, which, I mean, hey, you're 7-4. I think you'd be happy with that if you told him before the season, hey, you're 7-4. At the same time, it was, one of maybe two chances left in the AFC to really kind of show that you're there and you're a contender and you can compete with the top dogs in the AFC. And they failed to do it. And I think that there was a substantial gap, right? A few plays maybe make it a little bit closer, but I don't think the final score is indicative on Monday night of what that game actually was. And I think the biggest kind of red flag that came out of that game was the injury to J.K. Dobbins. I mean, J.K. Dobbins has been a revelation for the Chargers. And even though the Chargers haven't been a great running team, the best part of that running game has easily been J.K. Dobbins. And so to see him go down with a knee, to see him not be able to return to that game, I think puts out a lot of, different red flags because it's basically been him and everybody else. And for the Chargers who want to be that physical running football team, whether or not they've actually been able to achieve it or do it efficiently from a week-to-week basis, it all starts and stops with J.K. Dobbins. And I think the nice thing about J.K. Dobbins is, although he hasn't, broken 100 yards every game or any of those kind of things, he can be having a bad game and break off a 40-yard run, which just brings a different kind of element to your offense, brings an explosiveness to your running game that you just don't get with the other guys. So as the time we're recording this right now, there's been no news that has come out about J.K. Dobbins yet, but I think I have to cut in here because we had to record this episode early due to holiday travel plans and things like that. We did not know what was happening with J.K. Dobbins' injury, and now we do. According to Ian Rappaport, Chargers standout running back J.K. Dobbins suffered a knee sprain in Monday's game that'll cause him to miss some time. Sources say he's out this week against the Falcons and up in the air after that. Good news and bad news. The bad news is J.K. Dobbins is going to miss a critical game as the Chargers try to lock up a playoff spot during a really tough stretch of games. And the good news is that J.K. Dobbins likely isn't going to miss the rest of the season. The day to watch for is Sunday. If he doesn't go on injured reserve on Sunday, it means it'll be something they expect to last less than 4 games, which would be great news, especially for someone like J.K. Dobbins, who has had multiple knee surgeries and had multiple seasons end on injured reserve. Jim Harbaugh seemed to concede that he was going to be out this week, and that means it is the Gus Edwards and Kimani Vidal show, and I hope that Kimani Vidal gets a bigger chance to show what he can do because he played in 4 games in the absence of Gus Edwards when Gus Edwards was on injured reserve. Didn't really feel like he got to show his full ability, and I do think he does bring some explosiveness to Edwards' bruising style. That's one thing that J.K. Dobbins brought, was that explosiveness, even if the run game was struggling. Now they'll try to replicate that and find an identity without their top running back in a critical time of their season. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but just wanted to drop that news because we now know J.K. Dobbins will not be playing in the upcoming game. There's two kind of ways, and in the micro, it's, hey, can he play this week? Because the Chargers have a much better chance with him on the field. He's on pace for 1,000 yards, 4.8 yards per carry. And just to kind of show how important he's been, I mean, the Chargers had 76 rushing yards in that first half. It was one of the big surprises of that game, going up against a really stout run defense, that they were able to actually move the ball a little bit. And a lot of that was J.K. Dobbins, who had 40 of those rushing yards. The second half, when they didn't have him, they had 7 for the entire half. So I think that shows you. But on kind of a macro scale, it's like, okay, well, if he can't go, right, if he's done for the season, right, I'm not saying that he is, but we don't know that at this point. Now it's Gus Edwards, who you brought in first, right? This was the guy that was supposed to be your bell cow running back, but unfortunately, he's only had 2 of his 7 games average over 3.3 yards per carry. Kimani Vidal, their 6th-round pick in the running back, who actually only played in the 4 games that Gus Edwards was injured. That's the only time he's actually been active on game day. He's yet to scratch over 3.3 yards per carry in any of the 4 games that he's played in. So it's hard to understate kind of how important it is for J.K. Dobbins' injury not to be something significant. And for this matchup specifically, hey, if it's not something significant, how do you get him back for this game?
Yeah, it does feel like, the big part of the Chargers' identity and a big part of the identity of any Jim Harbaugh coach team is going to be that physicality. And as you're suggesting, that physicality seems to be, in terms of the running game being effective, seems to be linked to J.K. Dobbins's, status and health and durability and all those various things. And if he does play this week, he should have a big game, because the Falcons have proven throughout this season that they can't really stop the run. And if he doesn't sit out this game, that does give them a leg up, that maybe, just maybe, they will be able to finally stop the run this year. Although we thought that going into that Cowboys game a couple of weeks ago, they were basically the NFL's worst run team in the league.
Yeah.
They ran for 137 yards in that game. So, this might be the breakout game for Gus Edwards and Kimani Vidal based off of that alone. But when we turn our attention to the Chargers defense, what is sort of the story here? Is it looking at, some of their struggles against some of these potent offenses like Cincinnati and Baltimore in back-to-back weeks?
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. It's just, can this defense bounce back? I mean, obviously went into the Bengals game and even still have the NFL's top scoring defense as of now. At the same time, it doesn't feel as good when you've given up, an average of 28.5 points over the last 2 games. So that's going to, take a little bit of shine away from that top scoring defense. I mean, the first 9 games, you have, allowed an average of 13.1 points per game. And then back-to-back weeks, you've, allowed a season high, 27 against the Bengals. And then you go up and play against the Ravens and you give up 30 for the first time this year. I think when you're looking at, if they can actually do it, one of the biggest stories will just be, can they get a little healthier, right? They really missed Denzel Perriman in this last game. They really missed their rookie 5th-round pick, Cam Hart, who's already become a huge part of this defense as one of their better cover corners. And they wasn't able to play in this last game with a concussion and now an ankle injury. So getting either of those guys back would go a long way. But I think for the Chargers, the biggest thing against the Falcons is just like, how do you stop the snowball from turning into an avalanche, right? Because that's what it's been. Can you get that big stop that breaks up a succession of scoring drives for the other team? Because you look back at this last game against the Ravens, 5 consecutive scoring drives, 4 of those being touchdowns, and 2 of those touchdowns being 40-plus yard touchdowns, right? And if that was a one-time thing, maybe you could write it off and say, hey, the Ravens are going to Raven, and they're super dangerous, and they're going to do that to a lot of teams. The problem is like you said, it's against the good teams, and that's why it's kind of weird with the Falcons, because it's like, I have no idea which Falcons offense is going to show up in this game. I don't know if the Chargers can rebound in this game, if I can say to myself after, okay, they did it, they passed the test, they beat a good offense. But like the Bengals, a team that has 4 wins this year, in that game, they had 3 consecutive touchdown drives in the second half to get them back in that game. And then they missed 2 field goals in the next 2 drives. So it's like, that's back-to-back games where you should have been giving up scoring drives on 5 consecutive drives. For the defense, that's been the top scoring defense in the league this year. So I think for the Chargers, it's like, hey, how do you stop that dam from breaking, right? If you give up a touchdown, how do you find a way on that next drive to get that big stop so that it just doesn't turn into an avalanche where, in back-to-back games, you're giving up that many points on consecutive drives.
Yeah, I think you make some great points, and I think this is a perfect week to kind of find out what if this Chargers defense is as for real going up against capable offenses these last couple of weeks. I say capable because I'm not convinced that the Falcons have a good offense at this point in time, given their struggles against some of the better defenses. So it feels like it's a movable object versus a very stoppable force when it comes to these two units, and that's going to get us to some of the big stories for the Atlanta Falcons. Can this Falcons offense score against a good defense, as the Bengals and Ravens have done in back-to-back weeks? And that will be a big part of their ability to win this weekend. And we'll get into that, guys, as we continue today's Crossover Thursday. Now get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app is going to give you everything you need to bet on the NFL all in one place. Whether you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can go and check out the latest stats, the live play-by-play, and so much more on the very same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com right now to join today and check out the line for this Falcons-Chargers game, where the Chargers are 1.5-point favorites on the road against the Atlanta Falcons. Is that going to be your first $5 bet? Well, if it is, well, guess what? If you win, you'll get $150 in bonus bets. Check it out at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So continuing today's Crossover Thursday with myself, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, and Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers. And we're talking about the big stories for the Atlanta Falcons, and piggybacking off of what Daniel just talked about with this Chargers defense taking a little bit of a downturn in recent weeks. Well, it's the same story for the Atlanta Falcons offense, taking a significant downturn in recent weeks, and really been a downturn pretty much anytime they face a halfway decent defense so far this season. That if you look at DVOA rankings, in top 15 DVOA rankings, formerly for the Football Outsiders website, now with FTN Fantasy, against any defense that is currently ranked top 15, the Falcons are averaging less than 14 points a game against those opponents. And that's a big reason why when you look at some of the stats for the Falcons in terms of their offensive production, you're not really looking at this sort of potent offense, because basically when they face bad defenses, they put up a ton of points. I think they're averaging almost 30 points a game against bottom 15 teams in DVOA rankings. But, basically they go from a top 3 offense to a bottom 3 offense, depending on the quality of opponent. And I think this is going to be a critical part to sort of discovering, like, okay, as Daniel just discussed, like, this Chargers defense is vulnerable against quality quarterbacks. But the thing I've noticed, Daniel, these last couple of weeks especially, is, you saw some of that late game sort of mobility from Joe Burrow to sort of escape the pocket and create some plays on the run. Obviously, Lamar Jackson does that, day in and day out, although he didn't necessarily have to do it nearly as much this past Monday night as we've seen in past games. That's not an issue, right? That to me was a way that they were able to attack this Chargers defense. That is not going to be an issue this week, with Kirk Cousins being basically the least mobile quarterback in the NFL up to this point. Do you feel like the mobility of the quarterbacks has been especially damaging to this Chargers defense these last couple of weeks? And, how concerned are you with Kirk Cousins, statue-esque ability in the pocket?
It's such a great point that you bring up. I mean, going into the last game, the Chargers allowed 20 plus rushing yards to quarterbacks and like 6 of 7 going into that one, which is why it was kind of alarming they lost the way that they did when Lamar Jackson only had 15 rushing yards, right? Like, if you'd seen that score, you'd be like, okay, well, Lamar probably went crazy, because that has been something that has killed the Chargers defense, especially on third downs, big downs, things like that. Not just guys being able to scramble, but in Joe Burrow's case, a slippery guy in the pocket that's hard to bring down, and then letting a sack turn into an almost sack, and having that almost sack turn into a big play. So I think you really hit it on the head there, because you look at the Chargers' losses. I mean, against Patrick Mahomes a couple of times, hey, big downs, he's finding a way to escape and make plays down the field. You look at the game against the Cardinals they had, where They lose by 2 points in that game, and a big reason why is because they gave up a 40-plus yard touchdown to Kyler Murray scrambling out of the pocket. So I think that it is a huge benefit to the Chargers that they're playing someone that can't move as much, because if you added up the amount of almost sacks the Chargers have had this year, it would be more than the actual sacks they've been able to provide. So I think being able to go up against someone who's not as slippery and less mobile definitely plays in their favor, because they've gotten close a lot, and a lot of the big plays they've allowed are guys being able to avoid that first sack, being able to extend the play outside of the pocket, and it doesn't feel like Kirk really has that in his game to this point.
Yeah, so almost sacks. That's a incredible stat. The Falcons are king of almost sacks.
Yeah.
But I think with Kirk, the Falcons have already mentioned that they want to implement more play action this year or after this bye week. And so we probably will see Kirk Cousins a little bit more on the move than we've seen, but I don't think you need to worry about Kirk tucking and running and gaining 20 yards on any given down. But, coming out of this bye week, this is going to be a big week for this Falcon team because they've struggled going into their bye week, losing a heartbreaker to the Saints where they clearly outplayed the Saints, missed a couple of key field goals and lost that game, and then just got the break speed off of them by the Denver Broncos the week back in week 11. And so a big question has been like, what is this team going to look like coming out of the bye? And that's sort of the big topic for the Falcons defense is, are they going to switch it up? Because the Falcons play a very passive, bend but don't break type of defense. And are they going to dial up, more blitzes? They already, blitz a decent amount at a healthy rate, but will they crank that up a little bit more to try to supplement what has been the NFL's worst pass rush by far this year? And that was something that Raheem Morris did when he took over the interim head coaching spot back in 2020 after Dan Quinn started that season 0-5. They dialed up the blitz because their pass rush was not working through those first 5 games. I think they had like 7 sacks in those first 5 weeks. Well, now they have 10 sacks in 11 games this year. So it's even worse pass rush. So, it's something that I think they need to do, because I think if they just let it sit back and let Justin Herbert just kind of sit back clean in the pocket, well, he's going to be clean in the pocket regardless of what the Falcons do. But, if they don't try to at least dial up some pressure to try to, dictate where he's going to throw the football, he's just going to be able to pick them apart, especially with the emergence of Ladd McConkey, who Falcon fans are very familiar with from the Georgia ties. He's clearly the Chargers' number 1 wide receiver. And I think that's going to be a key matchup, because if the Falcons can keep him contained, that's going to be their best avenue to slowing down this pass defense. That may be a concern at this point in time. We don't quite know at this point in the week what the status is for their nickel cornerback, D. Alford, who missed last game against the Broncos with a hamstring injury. Hopefully coming off the bye week, he'll be 100%. But he hasn't played particularly great this season. And so that is a matchup that I think the Chargers could easily exploit if he doesn't, step up his play in a significant way this week.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking at how do you stop this Chargers offense, which hasn't been one of the more high-flying offenses in the NFL this year, but also has, I think, has scored at least 23 points in 5 straight. They haven't had any of those, 14 or less point games in a long time, which has been really nice. And I think that if you're looking at the Chargers offense and how do you stop them, it's like, okay, well, who do you want to be? Ladd McConkey? Or is it, hey, maybe make them feed Quentin Johnston, who went, 0 for 5 on his targets in this last game with 3 crucial drops and just feels like his confidence is spiraling out of control. Seems like a pretty easy decision there. But just like we talked about, the Falcons' inability to play against good defenses and the Chargers' defense's inability to really slow down great offenses, feels like the same thing with the Chargers' pass protection and the Falcons' pass rush, right? Because both units have been very bad so far this year, and I think that that's something that's going to play a huge factor in this game. But I think that if you're the Falcons defense, it's Ladd McConkey and who else, right? Like, if I like the fact that even Ladd McConkey had the game that he did on Monday night, especially with a guy like Marlon Humphrey over there, obviously a very, very bad pass defense on the season for the Ravens, but like, there's really nobody else. Josh Palmer, super inconsistent. Their best receiving tight end is a run blocking tight end named Will Dissly, who's way overachieved for what he was brought in to do. But at the same time, those aren't weapons that are scaring anyone, right? But I do think, to your point, one thing that Justin Herbert has shown throughout his career, because, I mean, he's had some pretty questionable receiving groups out there for him, but if you give him the time, he will be able to pick you apart. And I think the thing is to your point about, Raheem Morris and just how can he speed it up? How can they heat it up a little bit? The one thing that was a little concerning from that last game was just that even when his protection is holding up at times, and this is something that I think plays into the Falcons' favor, Justin Herbert doesn't always trust them to hold up. So it's like you see him on one key play in that last game, he's throwing a go ball to Quentin Johnston, and that's just not what his game is. But he knows kind of before the snap, he thinks there's going to be pressure, and he's almost making that decision pre-snap where he's like, instead of potentially taking a sack while in field goal range, instead of potentially, waiting to see what happens and see what opens up, I have a one-on-one matchup on the outside, and I'm just going to go for that because I don't trust this protection. So even if they can have the illusion of pressure, which for the Falcons, maybe that's enough because that's been what most of their season has been, maybe that is something that gets them a couple of key stops, right? Maybe that gets them to force Justin Herbert into throwing to some guys he really shouldn't be throwing to. And I think that's a huge point you make about this upcoming matchup.
Yeah, we'll see if the smoke and mirrors Falcons pass rush holds the key to victory, and we'll break down some other keys to victory for both of these teams heading into this Week 13 matchup as we close out today's Locked On Falcons, Locked On Chargers crossover Thursday. Guys, it is basketball season, and it's time to get back in the arena, and Game Time is going to make it easy. They take the guesswork out of buying tickets, whether it's basketball, whether it's comedy, other sports, music, theater, whatever event is near you. Game Time is taking the guesswork out of buying tickets, and they have a brand new feature called Game Time Picks. It's going to make getting tickets to those events even easier because it's going to filter out the fluff and show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And the great thing about Game Time is what you see is what you get. So you head on into the app, you toggle all-in prices on in the app, and you don't have to worry about getting slapped with hidden fees at checkout. And you also can get those panoramic seat views, so you can pick out the perfect spot in whatever venue you're trying to get into to see the action, whether it's a play, whether it's a basketball game, whatever it is. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons with Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers here for Crossover Thursday, presented by Prize Picks. Make sure you download the app and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll win $50 instantly when you play $5. So let's get into some of these keys to victory, Daniel, for the LA Chargers. What are three things that we need to see this Chargers team do in order to emerge with a win on Sunday?
I mean, I think there's a lot of common denominators of what has kind of gone into most of the Chargers wins, or all of the Chargers wins. But I think when you look at what happened in this last game specifically, I think the thing at the top of the list, especially playing for a Jim Harbaugh team, is just raising the level of physicality. Like, I don't think many things get under Jim Harbaugh's skin more than losing and kind of getting bullied the way that they did, right? And now you're going up against one of the top backs in Bijan Robinson, and love his game. You have to be able to raise that physicality, not just offensively, but defensively as well. I think one of the big things you saw from the Chargers wide receivers is just like they got out physical. They were getting grabbed. The Ravens went into that game basically saying, we're just going to grab the hell out of everyone and make them throw the flag every single time, right? And the Chargers wide receivers outside of Ladd McConkey, who's not just a Georgia Bulldog, but just a certified dog in general, he was able to do it. The other guys weren't. So I think raising the level of physicality will be key in this one. Winning on third and fourth downs. Aaron, if I was the Falcons going into this game, I would go for it on every fourth down. Okay, maybe that's maybe a slight exaggeration, but the last three games, opposing teams have converted every single fourth down attempt against the Chargers. 6 out of 6. 2 fourth down conversions per game the Chargers are allowing over their last 3 games. And just the inability to get off the field on third down for what's supposed to be a really, really good defense. The Ravens converted at over a 50% clip last week. And over the last 3 games offensively for the Chargers, they've only converted third downs at a 34% clip. Not good enough. Like, it's crazy that 2 of the games were wins that we're talking about in that span. And that's what they're doing on third downs. Huge reason the Chargers have been settling for too many field goals. And then, kind of like you talked about, take advantage of the Falcons' lack of a pass rush, right? If you can't hold up against this group, who can you hold up against? But I do think that the matchup that'll be really interesting to watch is even maybe not having their best years, right? Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata versus a very, very poor Chargers interior. I mean, when you're looking at where the pressure has come from against this team this year, it's the interior. They have an all-pro left tackle. They have a rookie kind of phenom at tackle with Joe Alt, who's played well above his years. The interior is where the Chargers have really, really struggled. And even for a team that's averaged less than 1 sack per game this year in the Falcons, it's going to concern me going into every game. So if they can take advantage of that lack of a pass rush, let Justin Herbert pick them apart, that'll be key to a victory.
Yeah, and I hope the Falcons can take advantage of that weak interior where some of their most reliable pressure comes from linebacker Caden Ellis with some of the off-ball blitzes that they like to throw at them. But when I look at sort of the keys to victory for the Falcons, one of those is sort of keeping Justin Herbert contained. And they're going to have a hard enough time to stopping Justin Herbert's arm in this game. And so if his legs get involved, and we've seen that happen these last couple of weeks, that's going to be a nightmare for this Falcons defense. It's just going to be too much for them to handle. And that's where they need linebacker Troy Anderson, who's been battling a knee injury all season long, back healthy this week to spy. He's the only guy in the middle of that defense that has the athleticism to be able to maybe make an open field tackle against Justin Herbert if he does decide to tuck it and run. So in addition to the Falcons pass rush getting home up the middle, they're going to need that linebacker play to step up in the event that pass rush does not necessarily keep Herbert contained in the pocket. And then the other key for me is they need a fast start offensively, right? They don't want to get behind against this Chargers pass rush now that it seems like it's fully healthy with Khalil Mack working his way back, Joey Bosa, Tuli Polotau, Bud Dupree, former Falcon, and whatnot. The Falcons' offensive line, as good as it is not really built to play from behind. And so if the Chargers get off to a lead and those guys are able to pin their ears back, it's going to be trouble for the statuesque Kirk Cousins in the pocket. And basically the simple stat that basically tells me that how the Falcons start is going to kind of dictate how they win the game is when they score a touchdown in the first quarter this year, they're 5-1. When they don't, they're 1-4. So it's as simple as that. We'll probably have an answer on whether or not the Falcons are going to win this game by the end of the first quarter. If they have 7 points on the board, they got a good shot. If they don't, it's going to be a problem. So that's my second key to victory. And that last one is, win the turnover battle. It's a cliche thing, in this league, but it's so true when it comes to the Falcons. You look at their wins this year, they're +6 in turnover margin, and their losses, they're -8. Now, it's going to be hard to win a turnover battle against the Chargers because they've turned the ball over a league low 5 times this year. So they're not going to give the ball away, right? The Falcons going to have a hard time taking the ball away from this Chargers team, but if they give the ball away to the Chargers team, this is going to be a self-defeating prophecy for them. So they can't afford. Basically, I'm saying, instead of winning the turnover battle, maybe Jesse Bates can steal one from Justin Herbert, throwing it to Ladd McConkey, or maybe Quentin Johnson will drop one into AJ Terrell's hands or something like that, and they might get an interception that way. But it's one of those things where it's not really winning the turnover battle. Just don't turn the ball over if you're the Falcon. Don't give the Chargers extra opportunities for them to, Justin Herbert and this offense to find ways to win against a bad Falcons defense. So those are, for me, the 3 keys to victory. Daniel, what are sort of any parting thoughts for the listeners here on Locked On Chargers and Locked On Falcons on this crossover Thursday before we duck out of here?
Yeah, man, I totally agree with, what the game plan should be and kind of the ways that the Falcons can win on this one. It's interesting hearing, another team who has some of the same struggles, but also kind of has some inverse struggles that the Chargers have, right? Because the Chargers have started really hot. And I think that's why you make such a good point about the Falcons starting hot in this game, because even in this last game on Monday Night Football, it'd be easy to forget that the Chargers were up 10-0. And it hasn't been the first time that they've gotten up big and allowed a team to come back on them. So I think that for the Chargers, it's more being about a second half team, right? And not allowing those leads to go as quickly as they have. And the one thing about this Chargers team is, say what you will about them, they've always come out incredibly prepared. Like even in this last game, right? They forced 2 punts against the Ravens before they ended up going and scoring on 5 straight drives. So can the Chargers continue to be a very prepared team coming up against a team that just came off a bye week? I mean, this is a hugely pivotal game for both of these teams. Chargers have the Chiefs coming up next on their schedule, a team that they haven't beaten since 2021. And there's some teams in the AFC that could push them, right? So I think that for this matchup, it is hugely important for both of these teams' playoff implications. For the Chargers, it's like, hey, just like the defense has been in the last couple of games, you can't let this spiral, man. Like, you lost one game, you're 7-4. You got the Chiefs next week. You go lose this game, you're staring down the barrel of a 3-game losing streak, and teams like the Broncos potentially passing you, teams like the Dolphins who were outdone, them coming back a little bit and getting on your heels. So I think it's a hugely important game for both teams, and for the Chargers, a lot of those things they have to try to take away as far as your keys for victory, because that has been things that have doomed them all season long.
Well, for any Chargers out there listening, don't listen to what Daniel says. Treat this game like it's nothing. Get ready for the Chiefs game.
Overlook it.
Yes,
overlook
the
this
Atlanta
game.
Falcons.
Man, this is go. I hope it's a weird game. I remember the last game, man. It was a weird game. Drake London recently said it was his, welcome to the NFL moment when Khalil Mack just totally like little boyed him, just stole the ball right out of his hands. And then was it Daquan Jones who just looked at Justin Herbert and fumbled after the Chargers had fumbled. He's running down the sideline. The game's pretty much over, right? And then he just fumbles. The Chargers had that happen to them this year. Tierra Tar intercepted Kyler Murray, and just you realize, hey, this dude's never carried the ball offensively in his life. And then he fumbles it, and it immediately took me back to that Falcons game, that weirdo Falcons game.
Yeah. That was Taquan Graham that did the
Taquan Graham. Yeah.
So yeah, Falcons Chargers. It's going to be a weird one. It's just the nature of these two teams, and the last two times they faced Justin Herbert, it has ended with Justin Herbert leading the Chargers down the field in the fourth quarter to win the game. Hopefully that won't happen a third time in a row, but we'll see. It will certainly be an interesting one, guys. That's going to do it for us here on Crossover Thursday, presented by Prize Picks. Make sure you continue to check out Locked On Falcons and Locked On Chargers throughout this week to get geared up for this Week 13 matchup. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And for your second listen, of course, check out the two shows from Locked On NFL Daily, the Madman Tyler Rowland talking up the Titans, talking all about the NFL teams, and head to the barbershop with Tony Wiggins, our guy Tony Wiggins, to get that real NFL talk on Locked On NFL. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.